All right, this video is for Module 44 on exchange rates and macroeconomic policies. So we talked about in the last video about fixed exchange rates versus floating exchange rates. And they both can have impact as far as how we're actually going to use monetary policy. So first of all, fixed exchange rates. Fixed exchange rates, they are fixed, but at the same point in time they can move. The government can change the fixed exchange rate, so they can move it. Say, for example, from, I think in the last video I said 1.5 euro to 0.75 euro per US dollar. They can do that. When they do that, what happens is that devaluation is when they reduce the fixed exchange rate, while revaluation is going to increase the fixed exchange rate. So, for example, from the last video where I was talking about the exchange rate of the euro per US dollar, if we go from $1.50 euro per US dollar to 70.75 euro per US dollar, that would be a devaluation because that's decreasing the exchange rate. Whereas the opposite would be a revaluation. This particular cartoon, it says, this is supposed to be funny. So this is talking about the value of the yuan, the Chinese currency. So it's supposed to be funny. It's a farmer in the United States, I'm assuming, and this is obviously the value of the yuan, and it says, looks like the Chinese are devaluing their currency yet again. So it gives you an idea of kind of what it looks like. All right, so reevaluation. Reevaluation does increase the value of your currency compared to another currency. So, for example, if we go from 0.75 euro per US dollar to 1.5 euro per US dollar, it makes domestic things, so for example, products in the United States, more expensive. Okay, so products in the United States are more expensive. We're appreciating the currency. So it makes things in the United States more expensive for foreigners, which causes them to say, oh, wait, no, don't want that. So it causes less exports, which, remember, exports and imports are part of the current account, so it decreases the current account. However, devaluation makes domestic products cheaper. In other words, we're depreciating the currency, and it's going to lead to more exports, which increases the current account. So all of those exports, when we have a reevaluation, it's going to cause less exports. If we have devaluation, it's going to cause more exports. And changing the exchange value to reduce a surplus or a shortage will also affect the aggregate demand. So what happens is that if we have a change in the exchange value, so if we have a change in the exchange rate, that means that we are going to have aggregate demand is also going to change. So, for example, if we have exports and imports, we are going to change the exports and imports. Remember, aggregate demand is also including consumer spending, investment spending, government spending, and our one that we haven't really talked about a whole lot, net exports. So if, for example, we have revaluation and the exports go down, what happens to our aggregate demand? Our aggregate demand will go and decrease. Whereas if we have devaluation, which means that our exports will increase, that means that our aggregate demand will increase. So this is basically what we have happening is that the depreciation of our currency, so when our currency drops in value, it increases net exports, which increases aggregate demand. So this will also go and push us out of a recession. Or on the flip side, appreciation of the currency, so the value of the currency goes up, this will also cause net exports to fall and lead to a decline in aggregate demand, which will obviously also fix an inflationary gap. Okay, floating exchange rates. Now, monetary policy can affect the interest rate, which will affect the demand and supply for currency as well. So we did talk about that monetary policy could be used to maintain a fixed exchange rate, but it will also affect a floating exchange rate. Because when you have higher interest rates, what happens to the demand for that currency? Higher interest rates leads to an increased demand for currency, and higher interest rates will lead to an increase or decreased supply of the currency, because what happens is that they don't need to exchange the currency for other currencies that have higher interest rates. So what we have happening is that here's our original equilibrium. Here is our increased demand for the currency, and then we also have a decreased supply of the currency. So here's our new equilibrium. So now, obviously, you can't really tell what happens to the quantity of the dollar, but you can tell that the exchange rate is going up, and so it's going to appreciate the currency. So what about the opposite? So this leads to less exports, because remember, interest rates are the exchange rates going up. We have appreciation. There's going to be less exports, and there's going to be more imports, which will also decrease aggregate demand. So we'll move aggregate demand to the left. So this will also go and fix an inflationary gap. Okay, so what about lower interest rates? If you lower the interest rate, it's going to lead to what happens to the demand for currency? The demand for currency is going to drop, because foreigners are going to say, nope, don't want to go there. They have low interest rates. I'm not going to get as much on a return on my investment. And we're going to have an increased supply of our currency. So there's the decrease in demand. And there's an increase in supply of our currency, because we're going to say, ooh, we want to get out of here. We have investors that are going to be leaving our country to go and supply more dollars to be able to get more currency in a foreign country that has a higher interest rate. So we're going to also have a right shift in supply. So a left shift in demand and a right shift in supply when we have a lower interest rate. So here's our new equilibrium. Again, we don't really know what happens to the quantity. It's kind of unclear. But we do know that the exchange rate is dropping. Since the exchange rate is dropping, that means that more people are going to say, oh, yes, we want to have exports from here because it's cheaper. But it also means that there's going to be less imports here, which is going to increase aggregate demand. So our aggregate demand will move to the right. And again, it will solve the problem of a recessionary gap. Okay, last slide is about the business cycles. Okay, so this kind of brings everything together. Business cycles in countries can be synchronized. What I mean by that is that they can actually follow each other. And so if we have a recession here, there will be a recession, for example, in the European Union, or a recession in China, or a recession in Japan, or wherever. And as well as the flip side, if we have an expansionary period. The floating exchange rates protects countries from recessions in other countries. And so you're not going to be hit as much from a recession from a foreign country if you have a floating exchange rate. If you have a fixed exchange rate, it's more likely to kind of bring you all down. So recession ahead, please tighten your seatbelts, because this may affect others. Okay, so what happens is that the exports will actually decrease during a recession. So a recession causes less demand for exports, but a floating rate also causes depreciation in the currency, which means exports don't fall by as much as a fixed rate anyways. So what happens is that when we have a recession, we have less exports out there, and when we have that floating rate, it's going to automatically drop the value of the currency. And so it means that because the value of the currency has gone down, more people are going to be interested in our exports anyways. So it kind of balances out a little bit. It's not going to drop as much as if we have a fixed rate. Okay, so we have that left shift in demand, and so it's going to drop the exchange rate. Because it's depreciated, then what happens is that more people will be interested in our exports. Imports will also decrease, because if it's going to decrease the value of our currency, everything else looks more expensive, so we don't need as many imports. So imports will decrease, which causes aggregate demand to decrease by less than under a fixed rate. Under a fixed rate, things would be much more extreme. All right, that's it. That's all I got. I'm done. That's the end of macroeconomics. I hope you learned something. Remember, AP test is coming up. Please let me know if you have any questions, and also reference any of those modules on Canvas that have to do with those outside resources.